So this is a part of a series of videos exploring faith as a series of stages along a journey. And in the most recent video, we looked at the first 3 stages of that journey, what are called confidence in Christ, help in discipleship, and responsibilities in ministry by the authors Kristi and Bill Gaultiere in their book Soul Journey. But what I want to talk about in this particular episode is what happens when all of that productivity, all of that connection, all of that momentum that you've built in those 3 phases all of a sudden feel like they just stop working. What happens when the faith that brought you to a particular place in life feels like it cannot carry you forward anymore? I know that's what happened to me. I remember exactly where I was when I began to sense that this was a new reality for me. I was sitting in the wings of the stage at the middle school that our church was renting at the time for our Sunday morning worship gatherings, looking out over the stage. And it was Easter. And we had gathered the most people our church plant had ever gathered up to that point. And the worship team is crushing it, doing a great job with this song. And we are baptizing people in this service. And I remember looking out over the stage, and inside I just said, I do not want to do this anymore. There is no way I can keep doing this. That something in my spiritual formation was off. I had been living life in the R stage, responsibilities in ministry, for a long time, going very fast paced for the Lord, but neglecting my own limitations and neglecting the care that my soul needed. And I was burning out. Now, right around the corner was COVID-19. And when that entered into the picture, there was really no hope for me. I burnt out badly. I reached out to some mentors around me. I remember being in one conversation with a pastor who had gone through a similar experience, but just a few years earlier. And I remember asking him, is there really hope here? Like, can you do ministry in a healthy way? And he took a long pause and then said, yes, but you just can't try to live life like you've been living it. And I was finding myself at an invitation, a pivot moment in my life. I had run into the wall. And maybe you are at a similar place in your spiritual journey. The things that you did that have led you up to a certain point, it's as if they've just sort of stopped working. They don't really push you as far along. Maybe you feel stuck or trapped, or you feel like God has somehow just kind of stepped back and he's just not in the picture anymore. This experience of the wall is not a personal failure. It's actually an invitation into deeper formation. That this is a part of the spiritual journey. It comes for all of us. And so as we look at the final few stages in the spiritual formation model known as the Christ stages, I want to just pay special attention to the wall. This idea of the wall being not just a spiritual rough patch that we go through, but actually a threshold, an invitation into a whole new way of living out the Christian life. It's this line between the first half of the spiritual journey and the second half of the spiritual journey. In the first half, we're learning and we're doing and we're serving, and it's really fun and exciting and it's making a difference. But in this second half, we're beginning to grow more deeply beneath the surface through a deeper surrender, through a greater trust in Jesus, through this inner transformation. There are so many different ways that we can hit a wall. For Bill and Kristi Gaultiere, they highlight 6 types of walls that we can all hit as we're passing through from responsibilities in ministry into hopefully receiving that invitation for the inner journey. So here's the 6 walls that they list out. The wall of physical burnout, meaning that I physically just can't keep up. I've been working too many hours, been running too fast at a pace. My body is wearing down. And then there's spiritual burnout. This was definitely where I was at. There's compassion fatigue. It's hard to feel empathy. I just can no longer care the way that I've been caring up to this point. I just don't have it in me. Then there's blowout. This is much more like a moral failure, this inability to live up to the high standards of Jesus Christ in a way that blows up relationships or blows up the situations that I find myself in and require a deep season of repair to make things right. And then you have a personal crisis, things that come into our lives like illnesses, unexpected death, divorce, things that because of what life has tossed us, we have to deal with. You cannot go around it. You cannot ignore it. You can't go over it or under it. The only way through it is to get through it. And then there's faith crisis, these questions that can come up out of nowhere that just plague us. Things like the goodness of God in the face of so much suffering in the world, questions that you might have about scriptures. And it's hard to shake, and it feels like because you can't shake those personal faith crisis, they're beginning to unravel your faith and you are questioning what you stand on. Some call this deconstructing. It's this idea of, I know with greater certainty what I don't believe, but I haven't rebuilt yet the thing that I do believe. So you kind of feel like you're planted in midair. And then also this concept of the dark night of the soul. Now that might be new language for you. It came from a 16th century writer named John of the Cross, but it's this idea of everything on the surface seems like it should be fine, but something's off. It's as if God's presence is harder to find, and the things that I did before just do not have the same result. It's a season of spiritual silence where God almost feels totally absent. Now, all these types of walls hit differently, but they all disrupt the idea that we can control the world around us. They all, in some ways, disrupt the picture that we had of the life that we thought we were going to be living at this point in our story. And it makes us rethink the faith that we've been living into. At the wall, we often encounter a roadblock. This question of, can I trust God? And this distrusting of God is in many ways so difficult to get past. And at the wall, we're really forced to dig deep and answer that question. Is God good? In the face of this wall, is God still good? Do I trust that God is still near? Do I believe that God is still trustworthy? The things that I used to feel were so secure now feel so fragile. But here, God's grace is at work, that we find at the wall, for those who receive the invitation, the grace of God's empathy. He doesn't shame us for coming against this wall. It's not a failure as much as it's an invitation into formation. He knows this is part of the spiritual journey, and he's there ready to meet us in that space with his tenderness, with his patience, and with his understanding. Which is why a great practice for all of us who feel like we are at the wall is to just be gut level honest with God. I found that journaling is an incredible practice at this space. That's the idea of writing out exactly how I feel, not trying to filter it, not trying to just jump ahead to, I know what I'm supposed to think and feel as a Christian, but just being honest, no performance, just raw prayers. I remember the first time I just wrote out, God, I am really tired. And then writing out, where are you? I feel abandoned. Writing out prayers like, if you don't show up, I am so done. Where are you? I recently went back to look at my prayer journal from the season where I was initially hitting the wall and trying to respond to the invitation of God there. And reading those prayers made me feel almost uncomfortable, seeing my own vulnerability before God. And here's the good news. God, he can handle all of your feelings and all of your thoughts. He can handle your honesty. In fact, he wants honesty, that God does his deepest work in reality. He meets us in what we feel, not what we wish we felt. He meets us where what we think, not what we wish. We think he meets us in that place of reality, and it's where true healing begins. And from that place, we can turn from that first half of the spiritual journey into the second half. The wall becomes this invitation to shift and to think more deeply and to find God in unexpected places. Where the first half of the spiritual journey, the first three stages, is primarily about what we do for God. It's about the things that we're believing, the things we're learning, the things that we're leading and serving. The second half of the spiritual journey is much more just about being with God. It's about trusting him and living all of life from a bedrock of trust in God. It's about surrendering outcomes and controls and just clinging to Jesus. It's about inner healing and receiving as a gift all that God has for us. It's a far less visible journey, but it's also far deeper of a journey. It's more transformative. At the wall, our goal isn't just to simply get through it as quickly as possible, which is always the temptation because it's painful. Instead, it's to let God do the deep work that he wants to do and meet us at that wall, knowing that on the other side, there's greater wholeness. You know, I said in an earlier video that Pete Scazzaro believes about 85% of evangelical Christians don't make it through the wall. For most of us, when we get to this place, it's so painful, we just bail out. But for those who trust that God's at work in this stage of their life, we can be invited into the next stage, the I stage, the stage of the inner journey. It's where we just surrender to God the wall and we begin to enter in to a deeper work of spirit. Here he begins to address deep things that are going on in our soul, our old wounds, our false beliefs, our buried pain, the parts of our soul that we haven't yet given over to the Lord because we don't know if he'll love us. We don't know if he'll meet us in that place. And now there's nowhere else to hide. And so we bring it before him. I remember where I was in the car where I felt the breakthrough as I received this invitation. And I literally was screaming, driving in that car as loud as I could. And something just broke in that moment as I was trusting God with whatever he wanted to do with my story. And that's what I pray for you. That if you receive this invitation into the inward journey, that what we find is that God meets us in that place in such an unexpected way. Oftentimes we're carrying habits and beliefs from a young age and we're carrying them forward and we don't even recognize how they're sabotaging the work of God around us. And so in this space, the most important roadblock to try to avoid is denying your emotions. That we try to self-medicate at times by going numb or trying to perform. We keep things spiritual, but we try not to keep things too personal. But instead, God is at work, meeting us in the wall, inviting us into this inner journey, not to hide our emotions, but to experience them, to feel them before God and to bring them to him. And yet, in this moment, he meets us, and it's profound the way that we can more deeply experience God's love. Not ideas about God's love, not just songs about God's love, but real moments with God's love, real lived moments where you sense God's presence meeting in your pain, not despite of your pain, but because he is drawn to the brokenhearted and he meets us in that place. So if you find yourself at one of these 6 walls that we have here on the screen, and you find yourself maybe having that invitation to an inner journey, or maybe you found yourself on this inward journey, one great practice in this season is what's often called spiritual direction. Close companions to this would be like counseling, working with a therapist. For lighter needs, maybe even meeting with a pastor just for some pastoral care. But it's the idea of finding soul friendships, people who you don't have to just go through life with a mask on, that you can navigate this with a partner, a guide on the journey, someone who can simply hold space for you as you start to notice what God is doing and what's surfacing up as you sit before God together. Healers that come alongside helping you experience honestly the way that God is coming to you right now. Now, here's why all this matters. Most Christians will never say yes to the invitation that waits for them at the wall. Sometimes it's because they don't have a vision for how God's at work in this stage of the spiritual journey, that he's at work at the wall and there's something on the other side of it. It doesn't mean that you have failed. It's actually an invitation into formation. And so at the wall, in that inner journey, wherever you find yourself, there are no detours. There is no way around this except to say yes, yield to God, and let him do his deep work in you, to let your soul be more deeply loved by its creator and let him meet you in those places of pain. For those who go on this inward journey, there awaits even more ahead of them. In the soul journey concept of the Christ stages, we see that there's a season ahead of spirit-led ministry and it's transforming union with Jesus. And some people over a lifetime begin to enter into these later stages. But wherever you are, there's no pressure, just peace from Jesus to find him right where you're at right now and to keep growing in Christ as he takes you on the journey with him. There's truth here. Truth to be embodied and live as his love forces out the fear that we're running from. So don't skip steps. Meet him right here, right now, wherever you are. If you're at the wall, say yes to that invitation to meet him there and be formed more deeply. So here's a couple of closing thoughts. Are you right now at the wall, or maybe you've experienced that type of experience in the past where you felt like you're just running up against something, and maybe you've run up against it multiple times and you've just thought, I'll revisit that later, I'll ignore it, I'll push it down. Maybe there's an invitation here for you to think that God might be inviting you into something deeper and something more. Another question to ask yourself, are you currently denying any emotions that God wants to meet you in and he wants to heal you in? And what would it look like for you to stop trying to earn it, to stop trying to perform and to produce and striving, and enter into a new trust, to relinquish control, to stop trying to cling to outcomes so you can just more deeply cling to God? If you've found this episode helpful, I want to invite you to listen to a message I preached a few years ago called Letting God Transform You. You can find a link in the description, and I hope that this helps you as you shift your perspective from trying to bring transformation about in our own strength, instead being in God's presence, letting Him transform and heal us. And Lord willing, we'll be back with a final video in this series of the Christ stages, providing you with a resource of how you can pray and experience God more deeply wherever you are on the spiritual journey. Remember, when you come to the wall, it's not because you have failed, it's because it is an invitation into formation. It happens to all of us. Say yes to the invitation. Hey, if you enjoyed that video and you have a moment, why not watch another one?